Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The sound of her laughter used to be my favorite melody. It filled our home with life, warmth, and everything I thought we stood for. Now, it grated against my nerves, each laugh a cruel mockery of the love I believed we shared. Funny how something so beautiful can become so haunting when tainted by doubt. It started innocuously enough. Hannah had been spending more time at the office, longer meetings, late-night projects, business trips that seemed to multiply out of nowhere. At first, I chalked it up to her growing ambition. I admired that about her, after all. She was sharp, driven, and endlessly charismatic. But when she began coming home with that distant smile and her phone always clutched tightly in her hand, I felt the first seeds of unease planting themselves deep within my mind. She was good at pretending everything was fine. Too good, in fact. When I casually asked about her days, she gave me just enough detail to disarm suspicion but not enough to satisfy curiosity. The meeting ran late, she'd say, dropping her bag by the door. Or, sorry I missed dinner, babe. It was a client thing. Her words were practiced, smooth, as if rehearsed. And I believed her, for a while. The turning point came one evening during dinner. We'd ordered takeout from our favorite Thai place and were sitting in the living room, balancing plates on our knees as we watched an old movie. Her phone buzzed once, lighting up the darkened room with a soft glow. She ignored it at first, then another buzz came, and another. Finally, she glanced at the screen. I caught the flicker of something. Was it guilt, cross her face before she put the phone face down on the coffee table. Work? I asked casually, stabbing a piece of chicken with my fork. She nodded too quickly. Yeah. It's nothing important. I let it go. Or at least, I pretended to. Later that night, when she went upstairs to shower, I glanced at the phone she'd left behind. It wasn't like me to snoop, trust was the foundation of our relationship. Or so I thought. But something about her reaction gnawed at me, and before I could talk myself out of it, I reached for the phone. The screen lit up at my touch, revealing a series of messages from someone named Mike. I didn't recognize the name, but the tone of the texts made my stomach churn. Can't wait for the weekend. I'll bring the wine this time. Missed you today. My hand trembled as I scrolled further. The messages were peppered with inside jokes and casual intimacy, the kind you don't share with a colleague. I felt the air leave the room, replaced by a suffocating weight on my chest. The sound of the shower turning off snapped me out of my haze. I set the phone back down, careful to leave it exactly as I'd found it, and retreated to my office. My mind raced, a chaotic swirl of disbelief, anger, and betrayal. Could there be an innocent explanation for this? I wanted to believe there was, but the evidence was damning. The next day, I couldn't focus on work. My job, which normally consumed my attention with its intricate puzzles and precise calculations, felt trivial compared to the storm brewing in my personal life. I needed answers, but confronting her outright felt premature. If I was wrong, I'd destroy the trust we'd built over years. But if I was right? That evening, I told her I'd be working late in the garage. Instead, I sat at my computer, researching tracking apps. The idea of monitoring her movements felt invasive, but my gut told me something wasn't right, and I needed proof before taking the next step. It didn't take long to find an app that would do the job discreetly. I downloaded it and waited for the right moment. That moment came a few days later when she left her phone on the kitchen counter while making coffee. I pretended to tinker with the sink as she chatted about her day, my heart pounding as I slipped the app onto her device. It synced with mine instantly, and I tucked my phone into my pocket, feeling both triumphant and sickened by my actions. Over the next week, I monitored her locations obsessively. Most of the time, her movements were unremarkable, commutes to and from the office, trips to the grocery store. But then Friday came, and she announced over breakfast that she had a weekend work retreat. "It's last minute," she said, buttering her toast. But mandatory. I'll be back Sunday night. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Where is it? She hesitated, just for a split second. A resort upstate. Some kind of team-building thing. Sounds nice, I replied, swallowing the lump in my throat. That evening, I watched her pack her overnight bag with practiced efficiency. She kissed me goodbye at the door, her smile as radiant as ever, and drove off into the night. I waited until her taillights disappeared before pulling out my phone. Her location showed a boutique hotel downtown, not the resort she described. My heart sank, though I wasn't surprised. I climbed into my car and headed for the address, my mind a whirl of anger and dread. As I approached the hotel, I parked across the street, my car blending into the shadows of the quiet neighborhood. I didn't have to wait long. Through the large glass doors of the lobby, I saw her. She was laughing, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a man who could only be Mike. They stood close, too close, their body language screaming intimacy. He leaned in, whispered something in her ear, and she laughed again, her face glowing with a happiness I hadn't seen in years. Together, they walked toward the elevator, their fingers brushing as they disappeared from view. I sat there for hours, paralyzed by a mix of rage and sorrow. My wife, the woman I'd shared my life with, was cheating on me. And yet, in that moment, I didn't feel the urge to storm in and confront them. No, this required precision. Calculation. Revenge wasn't about reacting, it was about planning. And plan I would. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours replaying every detail of what I had just witnessed. Hannah's laughter, the way she leaned into Mike, her carefree expression, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Was I the weight? The thought gnawed at me as I sat in the dark, staring at the photos I had taken through the hotel window. When dawn broke, I made coffee and sat in the kitchen, staring at her favorite mug on the counter. It was a ridiculous thing, bright pink with "Queen of Everything" emblazoned in gold letters. She loved it because I had bought it for her years ago during a road trip. Back then, it was an inside joke. Now, it felt like an insult. She'd been wearing a crown I didn't even realize was made of thorns. By the time she returned Sunday evening, I had composed myself. The photos, still on my phone, burned like hot coals in my pocket. I'd wanted to confront her the moment she walked through the door, but the calculating part of me held back. I needed more than pictures. Confrontation could wait. "Hey, babe," she called as she came inside, setting her overnight bag by the door. Her tone was cheerful, her smile as disarming as ever. "How was your weekend?" "It was fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "How about you? Productive?" She nodded, stretching her arms above her head. "Exhausting. But yeah, good. I think we made some real progress on this project." I forced a smile and kissed her cheek, though the gesture felt hollow. "Glad to hear it." Over the next few days, I observed her carefully, looking for cracks in her facade. She carried on as if nothing had changed, which made her lies all the more insidious. She cooked dinner, laughed at sitcoms, and even suggested we plan a weekend getaway, just the two of us. It was maddening, how easily she could slip back into the role of a devoted wife. But I had my own role to play now. I feigned enthusiasm, agreeing to her ideas, smiling when she smiled, all the while plotting my next move. The photos were only the beginning. If I wanted to dismantle her carefully constructed web of deceit, I needed more. That's when I decided to dig into her finances. Hannah had always been meticulous with money, keeping separate accounts for her personal and shared expenses. She justified it as a way to stay independent, and I never questioned it. But now, I wondered what secrets those accounts might hold. One evening, while she was in the shower, I logged into our shared desktop computer. Her email was still open, and a quick search of her inbox revealed a credit card statement that caught my attention. There, among the usual grocery store and gas station charges, was a reservation for the boutique hotel she'd visited with Mike. My stomach churned as I scrolled further, finding receipts for dinners, jewelry, and what looked like concert tickets, all things she'd never mentioned to me. My fingers trembled as I took screenshots of everything. Evidence, I reminded myself. The more I had, the harder it would be for her to deny. But the anger I felt was no longer a fiery burst. It was colder now, more focused. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about control. She had taken it from me, and I intended to reclaim it. The following weekend, she mentioned another work retreat. This time, I didn't wait for her to leave before making my move. I had already installed a keylogger on her laptop, which gave me access to her passwords. Once she was gone, I accessed her private email account and found exactly what I was looking for, a long chain of messages between her and Mike, detailing their plans for the weekend and reminiscing about their time together. The messages were sickeningly sweet, filled with inside jokes and declarations of affection. "I can't wait to see you again," Mike wrote in one. "You're the only thing that makes this crazy world make sense." Hannah's response was equally nauseating, "You're my escape. My safe place." Safe place. That phrase hit me harder than anything else. I had always thought I was her safe place, the one she could lean on when the world felt too heavy. But clearly, I had been replaced. I printed out the emails, carefully stapling them together into a neat packet. Then I added them to a growing folder of evidence, which included the photos, credit card statements, and other incriminating details. It felt like I was preparing for a trial, building an airtight case against the defendant. And in a way, I was. But this wasn't just about winning. It was about ensuring there was no way for her to manipulate the narrative when the time came. She was an expert at spinning stories, at twisting the truth just enough to make herself look like the victim. I wasn't going to give her that chance. As the weeks went on, I continued to play the role of the oblivious husband. I went to work, made small talk over dinner, and even indulged her suggestion to book a weekend getaway. All the while, my plan took shape. By the time she went on her next work retreat, I was ready to strike. The night before she left, we sat on the couch, watching a movie. Her phone buzzed several times, and though she glanced at it briefly, she didn't pick it up. Instead, she leaned her head on my shoulder, sighing contentedly. "I love this," she murmured. "Just us, no distractions." I forced a laugh, masking the bitter taste in my mouth. "Me too." As the credits rolled, she turned to me, her expression soft and earnest. "I know I've been busy lately. But I want you to know how much you mean to me." I stared at her, searching for any sign of sincerity. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I was wrong, if I had misread everything. But then I remembered the emails, the photos, the lies. The gears of her deception had been turning for too long to stop now. "You mean a lot to me too," I said quietly. Her smile widened, and she kissed me softly. "I'll make it up to you. I promise." I nodded, though my mind was already elsewhere. Tomorrow, she would leave, and my carefully laid plan would begin. It wasn't just about exposing her lies anymore, it was about reclaiming my life, one piece at a time. The next morning, Hannah left early. She kissed me on the cheek and gave me a radiant smile that might have fooled me once. "I'll call you tonight," she said before disappearing out the door, her overnight bag slung over her shoulder like a badge of innocence. I didn't watch her leave this time. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the counter with my folder of evidence. It had grown heavier over the weeks, thick with the weight of her deceit. Emails, receipts, photos, every detail meticulously documented. But today wasn't about gathering more proof. Today was about execution. The first call I made was to our bank. I'd already spoken with a lawyer about securing our finances, and the paperwork was ready. With a few signatures and some patient explanations, I moved half of our joint savings into an account under my name. It was only fair, I thought. She'd been spending her share on her little adventures with Mike. Next, I contacted the property management office. Our house, which I had worked tirelessly to pay off, was under both our names. By the end of the day, it wouldn't be. The lawyer had drawn up documents to protect the property in case of divorce, and with her name removed, she would no longer have any claim to it. I signed the papers and felt a strange sense of calm. It was like watching the gears of a broken clock finally align, each one clicking into place. By noon, I was ready for the final step. My lawyer had advised me against this, warning that it might escalate the situation, but I couldn't resist. I printed copies of the evidence, the emails, the receipts, the photos, and placed them in a neat envelope. Then I addressed it to Mike's wife. Yes, Mike was married too. A little detail Hannah had conveniently omitted. I had debated whether to involve her. It felt cruel, dragging another person into this mess. But as I thought about the lies Hannah and Mike had spun, the damage they had done, I realized she deserved to know. And if it caused a little chaos for them along the way? Well, that was just a bonus. I drove to the address I'd found in one of Mike's emails, a quaint suburban house with a tidy lawn and a minivan parked in the driveway. The kind of house where secrets like his weren't supposed to exist. I hesitated for a moment, the envelope heavy in my hand. Then, with a deep breath, I slipped it into the mailbox and walked away without looking back. Back home, I began preparing for Hannah's return. I packed her belongings into boxes, neatly labeled with her name. Clothes, shoes, books, all the little pieces of her life that had once been part of ours. I stacked them by the front door, a silent statement waiting to be made. The hours passed slowly. I couldn't focus on anything, my mind replaying the events of the past few weeks like a broken record. The lies, the betrayal, the way she looked at him in those photos, it was all too much. But then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a strange sense of peace. The hard part was over. All that was left was the confrontation. When she walked through the door that evening, her expression was serene. She set her bag down and stretched, clearly exhausted. "Hey," she said, smiling as she kicked off her shoes. "How was your day?" I didn't answer. Instead, I gestured to the boxes by the door. Her smile faltered. "What's this?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "You'll need these," I said evenly. "You're not staying here anymore." She blinked, her confusion quickly turning to anger. "What the hell are you talking about?" I stood, pulling the folder of evidence from the counter and placing it on the table between us. "I know about Mike," I said quietly. "I know about the hotel, the dinners, the jewelry. I know everything, Hannah." Her face went pale. "Dylan, Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't insult me with lies. I have the proof." She stared at the folder, her eyes darting to the boxes by the door and back to me. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. But then her expression hardened, and she straightened her shoulders. "You don't understand," she said, her voice steady. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "It's exactly what I think. You've been cheating on me for months, maybe longer. And now, you're going to face the consequences." "What consequences?" she snapped, her composure cracking. "You're throwing me out. Just like that? After everything we've been through?" I shook my head. "After everything I've been through, Hannah. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself, her eyes narrowing. "You'll regret this," she said finally. "I promise you, Dylan, you'll regret this." I met her gaze, unflinching. "Maybe. But not as much as you'll regret losing me." She grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I watched her go, the weight of the past few weeks finally lifting from my shoulders. The clock of my life had been broken, its gears jammed with lies and betrayal. But now, as I stood alone in the silence of our home, I realized something: I didn't need her to fix it. I could rebuild it myself, one piece at a time. And this time, I'd make sure it was unbreakable. The house felt unnervingly quiet in the days after Hannah left. At first, the silence was a balm, a space to process everything without her shadow looming over me. I moved through the house mechanically, unpacking the pieces of my life she had disrupted. It wasn't easy. Her presence lingered in every corner, the faint scent of her perfume on the couch, the forgotten mug in the cupboard, her favorite playlist on my phone. I told myself I was free. The betrayal was behind me, the evidence locked away, and the path forward clear. But as the days stretched into weeks, doubt began to creep in, accompanied by an unwelcome guest: guilt. Not for throwing her out, no, I stood by that decision. But for the way I had meticulously dismantled her world. Had I gone too far? Was I any better than her for sending that envelope to Mike's wife, knowing the chaos it would cause? One evening, as I sorted through some papers in my office, I noticed a file labeled Vacation Plans. It was one of Hannah's projects, a dream itinerary for a trip to the Amalfi Coast she'd always wanted us to take. I opened it, flipping through the detailed notes she'd written, recommendations for hotels, restaurants, even a little handwritten note on the back page: "Can't wait to see this with you. Love, H." For the first time since the confrontation, I felt a pang of something unfamiliar: loss. Maybe it was the reminder of what we had once shared or the life we had planned together. But that ache was swiftly overshadowed by anger. She'd thrown it all away for someone else. Whatever we could have been, whatever dreams we'd built, were nothing but ashes now. I pushed the folder aside and decided to step out for a drink. The local bar was a dimly lit refuge, filled with the hum of quiet conversations and the clink of glasses. I took a seat at the counter, nodding to the bartender as he set a whiskey in front of me. As I sipped, the noise around me faded, replaced by my own thoughts. "Dylan, right?" a voice said, pulling me back to the present. I looked up to see a woman standing next to me, her expression hesitant. She was strikingly familiar, though it took me a moment to place her. Then it hit me: this was Mike's wife. The one I'd sent the envelope to. "Yes," I said slowly, setting my glass down. "And you are?" "Charlotte," she replied, sliding onto the stool next to mine. "We need to talk." I tensed, unsure of what to expect. She didn't seem angry, but her presence here couldn't be a coincidence. "How did you find me?" She gave a small smile. "The envelope you sent had a return address. I thought it was only fair I track you down." My heart sank. "Look, if you're here to yell at me." "I'm not," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "Honestly, I wanted to thank you." Her words caught me off guard. "Thank me?" "Yes." She took a deep breath, her gaze steady. Finding out about Mike's affair was devastating, but it was also clarifying. It made me realize I've been living a lie for years. And it gave me the push I needed to leave. I studied her, searching for any hint of malice or deception, but her expression was sincere. "I didn't do it to help you," I admitted. "I did it because I wanted to hurt him, and her." She nodded. "I figured as much. But it doesn't change the fact that your actions changed my life." She hesitated, then added, "That's not the only reason I'm here, though." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" Charlotte leaned closer, her voice dropping. "After I confronted Mike, he told me something. Something about Hannah." I braced myself, unsure if I wanted to hear whatever she was about to say. "What?" "She wasn't just cheating on you with him," Charlotte said, her words deliberate. "She was using him. Manipulating him. He thinks she was trying to blackmail him. What? I stared at her, the words barely registering. Why would she do that? Charlotte sighed. Mike's an idiot, but he's also a successful idiot. He's got money, connections. And according to him, Hannah was pressuring him to leave me and start a life with her. She said if he didn't, she'd expose their affair to his business partners. My mind reeled. That doesn't make any sense. She already had me, why would she need him? Charlotte's eyes softened, her expression tinged with pity. Maybe she didn't want either of you. Maybe she just wanted control. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Was it possible? Had I been nothing more than a pawn in Hannah's game, a fallback plan while she pursued something bigger? The thought made my chest tighten, but before I could respond, Charlotte stood. I thought you should know, she said, sliding a business card across the counter. If you ever need someone to talk to. I nodded numbly, watching as she walked away. My drink sat untouched as her words replayed in my mind. Control. It all came back to that, didn't it? The lies, the manipulation, the careful way she had orchestrated her double life, it was all about control. And now that I had taken it from her, she was gone. Or was she? When I got home that night, I found the answer waiting for me. A letter sat on the kitchen table, the handwriting unmistakably hers. My hands trembled as I opened it, the scent of her perfume wafting up like a ghost. Dylan, it began. You think you've won, but you don't know the whole story. You never will. I'm not sorry for what I did, and I don't regret the choices I made. But one day, when you least expect it, you'll understand why I had to do it. Until then, remember this, the clock is always ticking. The letter ended there, unsigned. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, the words burning into my mind. The clock is always ticking. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot.